I think Razorfist would describe this as another case of be broke, get woke, ultimately croak. And this is probably on the get woke phase after the absolutely abysmal failure of the No Time to Die film, where they lost millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on that film. But this is what is happening on the print end for James Bond and Ian Fleming's publications. They have made the villains in the latest James Bond novel white men who oppose wokeness. This is in On His Majesty's Secret Service, written by Charlie Higson. That debuted in May. In the book's official synopsis, it shares it is the 4th of May, 2 days before the coronation of King Charles III, and the world's favorite spy has his work cut out for him. Bond is sent at the last minute to thwart an attempt to disrupt the coronation by the wealthy, eccentric, and self-styled Athelstan of Wessex, who is on a deadly mission of his own to teach the United Kingdom a lesson. Can Bond dismantle his shady plans and defeat his privately hired team of mercenaries? While the synopsis does not make it clear who Athelstan of Wessex is, a screenshot of the book from Leo Kurse and brought to our attention by ex-user Kenobi Steeg hints at who the villains are. The excerpt shared by Leo Kurse is part of Bond infiltrating Athelstan's organization, and more specifically his Anglo-Saxon castle. In order to do so, he poses as a man named Peter Sanborn, the leader of a group, supposedly of a group of 30 mercenaries. Kurse's excerpt sees Bond observing a number of guests who have also been invited to Athelstan's castle. It specifically describes a man named Roger Burkett. Burkett was an ex-Tory MP famous for promoting COVID vaccines, mask-wearing, 5G conspiracy theories, which had spilled over into the usual anti-immigrant, anti-EU, anti-BBC, anti-mainstream media, anti-cultural Marxist, climate change denial pronouncements. I mean, how many more could he have fit in there? I mean, holy smokes. I mean, just absolute cringe, terrible. Oh, wait. He does get one more in here. It was an anti-trans diatribe that had eventually got him kicked out of the party, and he'd soon after set up the New Freedom Party. I mean, just absolute garbage, terrible, ham-fisted, just sick writing here. Bond was struck by something. It was a long while since he'd been at any kind of function that was almost exclusively full of men. It felt strange. There was not even a pretense at diversity here. Athelstan hadn't been the least bit concerned about ensuring that half of the people he'd hired to carry out his coup should be women or non-white or disabled. This was an unapologetically old-school gathering. In Athelstan's world, he was king and could do whatever he wanted. So, I mean, just on the nose, just blatant telling you are a bad person if you have these ideas and you're white. I mean, just absolutely disgusting, sick, truly evil behavior here. However, this excerpt isn't even the most egregious part of the book. As Bond arrives for the party, Hickson writes he wanted to blend in. So this is before this kind of excerpt here that was shared to Twitter. He wanted to blend in, not draw attention to himself. He was Peter Sanborn, someone who was serious about his job. He just hoped to God that everyone else wasn't going to be wearing cloaks and hoods and jingling about in chainmail. So Bond is making references to the KKK now as he's arriving at the party. And then upon entering the main room, he observes many of the men in the room could be described as ex-military, ex-politician, ex-media pundit for hire. They become more and more extreme in their views and too toxic, unruly, and unsafe to remain affiliated with the radical groups they joined. When you become too far out for a far-right organization, you knew you were really on the outside. So making it very clear where these people stand. He then continued, said, but just look at them now with their champagne and nibbles, their shiny shoes, their beaming faces. They were firmly on the inside and loving it. They'd found their tribe, and very soon they were going to announce themselves to the world. No longer outcasts, no longer canceled, no longer marginalized. They were going to be the new overlords. There was only one person standing between them and chaos, James Bond. So that's clearly making it out that these guys are the villains, and James Bond is going to oppose them, right? Very clear who these people are and that they are indeed the villains. As Bond makes his way throughout the room, he makes further observations about who these men are. The men he talked to invariably started with what shows they'd been streaming, sport, travel, women, cars, and soon moved on to laughing about how much they hated cyclists and bus lanes and congestion charging and traffic calming, and how global warming was a con, and sooner or later came around to the big woke conspiracy, Black Lives Matter, the Great Replacement, and what are we going to do about the Muslims? I mean, just ham-fisting every single thing in this here. And then you get further into the novel. Athelstan actually finally arrives at the party. He makes his entrance, and then he has this like big speech about who these people are. And he says, you guys are the bloody best, the backbone of England, even though half of you aren't English at all. But you know what I mean. Wherever you're from, you understand that a country, any country, if it's worth its salt, must stand for something. Many people think I'm utterly old-fashioned and out of touch, but you know what? I couldn't care less. I believe in the idea of nationhood. A country must mean something. Or what is it? Just a place full of random people? A meaningless blob of diverse men and women? Oh, sorry, not allowed to call them that anymore, are we? So, like, he's hitting on the transgender ideology there. But you lot, you haven't been bamboozled and brainwashed by all this trendy leftist Tommy rot, and you're prepared to stand up for your principles. You're prepared to do something, to be something, to stand and fight. You are the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, ready to lay your lives on the line to keep the hated foreign invaders out. You are the boys in red at Rorke's Drift, holding back an army of Zulus. You are the Paras taking on the Argentines at Goose Green. Goes on and saying, but you also understand one crucial thing. The greatest enemy is not a foreign invader. It's not a Persian or a Zulu or an Argi. It's the enemy among us. The greatest threat comes from those who try to undermine our great country from within, be it a biased BBC journalist with a hidden agenda, a beardy from Islington who thinks we should all ride vegan bicycles and worship at the altar of Karl Marx, or a man in a dress who insists we call him they. Still later in his speech, Athelstan says, they've taken our history, our culture, our great legacy, and tossed it in the bin. Turned it all into a pantomime, a charade. King Charles III, perhaps we should better call him King Charles the Woke. His great-grandfather, George V, ruled an empire of over 400 million people that covered nearly 14 million square miles, nearly a quarter of the world's population, and a quarter of the Earth's total land. And what happened to it all? What did they do with it? They gave it away because it wasn't nice to have an empire. Eventually, Bond begins to tune out Athelstan's speech and begins to judge those in the audience. He says, Athelstan's private army was a toxic mix. Some were losers looking for validation. Others were thugs who enjoyed violence and wanted justification for it. They were the descendants of all those crusaders pouring out of the West into the Holy Lands, disgruntled ex-military, professional, private security firms looking to make a hit. So it looks like he's kind of almost taking a jab at Catholics there, too. Shocker. Finally, Athelstan reveals his grand plan. There are a handful of traffic pinch points around London. Block them, and you bring central London to a standstill. At the same time, we'll shut down the power grid. We'll cause a computer blackout. We'll get into Parliament, make the Capitol riots. Oh, there we go. I mean, literally, this guy's just hitting on every single point. I mean, it's totally cringe. Current day, just absolute garbage. Look like the Aunt Fanny's Tea Party. We can do these things when we will do all these things. We'll get into the BBC with its pathetic security system. Its guards outsourced to some godforsaken outfit like Rent-A-Kill. And once we've shut down the hated mainstream media, we will shut down Buckingham Palace, Parliament. You, each of you with your own units, know what to do. We will create maximum havoc. We will ensure that Charles is not crowned on the 6th. So clearly, Ian Fleming Productions going super woke, and it's probably because they are broke, and I would not be surprised if they ultimately croak indeed. Absolute garbage, but these people are telling you that you are a bad person if you happen to be white and you stand against the wokeness, and it's just not true. It's not true, and it shows you where these people think, where their mind is, how they're trying to manipulate people. They are telling you who the villains are and who they want the villains to be. They are literally trying to paint their own neighbors as villains. And they're all going to try and do it under the guise of, oh, look, they're actually trying to, they're doing it in a fictional way where they're trying to create a coup to stop the coronation of King Charles III, which is just utterly ridiculous. Even if you want to take a real life explanation that, you can look at Michigan and realize that that was pretty much entrapment and was basically an op by the FBI, and it's been exposed as the lie that is. So all of this is just trying to demonize and villainize people for having different views than them, and ultimately because they actually take a moral stand against their immorality. I think this is a huge detriment to James Bond. I think this will indeed also affect movies moving forward. I think people will realize this, and when you have stuff like this being published, you know that it's probably going to affect how they write future James Bond movies as well, because again, it is part of that get woke phase of Razor Fist's theory, which is be broke, get woke, ultimately croak. Let me know if you think this is fitting the pattern, and what do you make of them turning white men who oppose wokeness into these villains.
Subscribe for more.